Welcome, ladies, and thank you for joining me today. Thank you to our leader, Dora, our Programme Secretary, Carol, and our Treasurer, Diane. They constantly work their magic and have given us all the opportunity to join the wonderful world of Zoom. I'm constantly looking for the positives and silver linings of coronavirus lockdown. I thought we were fortunate when lockdown began that we were at least in springtime, then summertime, then autumn. Who expected that we would still be here in winter? But have you ever wished you could stay in the warm and hibernate at this time of the year? Well, in lockdown, we can stay in the warm, enjoy a film fest on TV, ignore the housework, and best of all, we can indulge our creative passions and feel so very fortunate that at the Romford Embroiderers branch, we have such a wonderful way to while away the hours, days and weeks and have something to show for it at the end. I hope today's workshop will be enjoyable for you all and perhaps open up a new avenue of artistic expression. So what are we going to play with today? Throughout the morning, I'll be guiding you through a process of putting together a few sheets of paper to produce a folded book to cherish, give away, donate to a charity shop, or file under B for bin. I hope you don't opt for the latter option, but as Beryl Taylor, one of my favourite textile artists, says, one thing I would say to anyone who wants to expand their horizons by trying new techniques, don't be afraid to fail. Although something might initially appear to be a failure, it can often turn out to be the start of something unusual or exciting. After lunch, Carol will be taking over the workshop tuition to guide us through making Dorset buttons. I am very much looking forward to trying this technique, and I know many of you are also excited about this. I'm not familiar with Dorset buttons, and I wondered how one would use the ring Carol said we needed. I realised, after a bit of research, that I was in the wrong county altogether, mistaking a Dorset button for a Suffolk puff. I was delighted to come across this page in Janet Edmonds' Beginner's Guide to Embroidered Boxes, which I think is a nice example of how Dorset buttons might be incorporated into textile work. Really looking forward to Carol's session. So, to introduce my workshop, I would just like to finish this introduction by quoting wonderful textile artist Linda Kemshall. You are only limited by your imagination and your willingness to experiment. All right, ladies, so you've all received a pack, hopefully, and you've all had a chance to do a little bit of advanced preparation and get some colour onto your paper. Just to show you, the paper that I've sent you is 100% cotton. I've used this Arteza one because it was easy to get from Amazon, and I think it works very well. The reason I use this cotton paper is it's very substantial, it takes dye well, and I first started using it when I was doing, early in lockdown, I started doing some eco printing, and I really loved the paper and loved the technique, and I sort of turned it into these little books that I'm going to show you today. So this is one of the eco printing books that I did to begin with. So on the background is where it prints using a steam process, and then I've stitched through some of the main pieces of it. I hope you can see that. And there's another one there as well, which was just a slightly different colour. I think the stitching works very well on these little books, so I hope you have a chance to do stitching if it's something that you like to do and enjoy as much as I do. Okay, right. In your pack, you will have received a template. I'm just going to talk you through the template so it gets into your head a little bit of what we're doing today, okay? So the template, you've all got one of those, I think. Let me see if I can get it straight. Okay. The thing to do with the spine, I've said here avoid stitching within the spine fold area, because when you come to assemble your book, you fold it in half and then you fold it again. That spine does not show on the book at all. It's inside, and you've got a nice little spine on the inside that actually forms the centre of the book. So don't stitch there. If you want stitching to show on that side, you need to do it on the reverse. So you've got nice, neat stitching on the inside of the spine if you want to do that. But just to show you how the template works, here you've got a line about 2 inches in from the edge. That is where you fold your book cover back, okay? So this area here is the area that will form the front and the back of the book, like this. Just another little coloured sample here to show you. That's how your book will look. The edges are folded to the inside. They'll be glued down eventually, and your little book will be that size. And you can decorate front and back, inside flaps, inside spine, all over, or you can have specific designs down the centre. I'll show you how I do that. So I don't expect you to turn something out that looks exactly like my work. I want you to use your own experience and artistic style and bring that to the session. I would say to you ladies, take your time. Although I'll work through the demos as quickly as I can, because there's a lot to get through, don't rush to keep up. I think Dora is going to try and record quite a bit of this, so you'll have something to refer back to, and you can always get in touch with me. Take a bit of time to decide on your design. You may already have thought about it. As this isn't a physical meeting, you've only got the one sheet of paper to work on, so be careful. I recommend that you use some scrap paper to do a bit of rehearsal if you're unsure at any time of where you're going with it. So I'm guessing that everyone's got their freezer paper template. You don't have to use it, but I'll show you how to use it. Also, I'll show you briefly how to print from blocks. We did have quite a nice session with Bev Colino at the beginning of last year, I think it was, and she was quite an expert at it. So I'll briefly show you that as well. You can, of course, not do any decoration at all, just rely on the colour and stitch to give you the outside of your book. You can also do all over printing if you wish to. Now the freezer paper, let's see if I can move that there. The freezer paper I've used is this Reynolds Kitchens one. It's easily available. The reason I'm using freezer paper for the templates, and we learned that from Mary McIntosh at the residential weekend, for those of you that were there, is there's 2 sides to it. One is a matte side, one is a shiny side. So you work on the matte side, drawing your design and cutting out. You then, on the shiny side, iron it with a cool iron onto the paper. It sticks to the paper. It then stops any paint that you're using from bleeding underneath and out away from the design you've made. If you're going to use a fairly thin paint, something like watercolour or even the Koh-i-Noors, or you can use Procyon dye, make sure your brush is very dry with the paint, or it still might bleed under. If you're using something like textile paint, acrylic paint, that should just sit on the surface anyway. Any paint that you use, don't put it on too thick. We want it to dry, and the thicker it is, the more difficult it is for you to get it under the sewing machine. So nice, easy touch with the paint. I'm going to show you this sample here, which may give you an idea of how much you can do without doing any extra stenciling or paintwork on it. This is purely my experiment to use food colouring When I decided on doing this workshop, I thought, because we're so far apart, I wanted to try and make sure that we'd got things that people might have readily available to use and not have to invest, or, you know, it's difficult to get supplies at the moment, isn't it? So this one here was my result from the food colouring. I think there was a picture of it on the pre-prep work that I sent out with the food colouring just sitting in the dye bath. This is how it came out. You can't see the colours very well on screen, but it is quite lovely. And then on the inside, again, this was all the food colouring that came out on the paper. So if you just want to have colour and stitch, it does come out very well, ladies. You just have to do a bit of stitching on there. But I was very pleased with the results of that one. I think I'm going to use food colouring quite a lot in my work from now on. Okay. So here's just also some more examples of how you can use all over designs rather than limiting yourself to just the, you know, the main part of the design. If you want to do all over, that's done with a leaf Indian woodblock, and I just did it all over. And then for the stitching, I've simply just stitched down the main spine of each leaf. This one here, printed all over, but I cut out a stencil of freezer paper. And I did that on the Sizzix machine. So if you've got a Sizzix machine, you can quickly get yourself a stencil. And again, I just stitched the main vein of the leaf. And I made a nice little, can you see that?
Yes.
Bookmark.
Yeah.
Just with some cut out leaves on it to give it a bit of extra design. That one is still in a state of undress, not finished. But then I'll show you how to finish them off later in the morning. Okay. Right, so thinking about your design, I did say I think simple shapes work very well. And I'm not an artist at all, so I often do a little bit of searching around for a shape and copy something from a Stitch magazine. This is from a Stitch magazine. This is by Chris Gray, and it was one where she did a cover of a book in an African style. So I took that as my template for this one. I made a full template so I could have the squares down the main cover of the book, the triangular shape on the inside flap, and this is the book I came up with using that design. Very simple design. I think again it worked very well, and as I'll show you, on the inside is the triangle. So you can use very simple shapes. You can do something much more elaborate if you prefer. For stitching on this paper, you need to be very much aware. I can't say it enough. It's very unforgiving paper when you're stitching through it. You make a mark through it, it's permanent. So you make a hole, it's permanent. Don't overstitch. Don't ever use free motion embroidery. It'll give you too many holes and the paper will disintegrate. But I think you can see with very simple shapes and design, you can get quite a nice result. You can just go sort of across the back. I think with this one, I got a bit of the inside of a kitchen roll, you know, when you've got the paper roll on the inside, put some rubber bands around it and just rolled it across. So I got this nice stripy effect in paint on the background. I've recently just also done, to show you another simple design, again from Stitch magazine, with a ginkgo leaf, which I really like. So I did the ginkgo leaf just as a little template to just put on the center of the book. That's my template that I used. You can see the paint on there after I've peeled it off from the background on the freezer paper. So I used metallic paint for this because I wanted to get a nice gold effect on my background. If you're going to use metallic paint or you put your paint on too thick, you will find probably that if you use the sewing machine to make the stitch holes, it'll drag. So what you can do is over your design, you can't really see it on the camera there, I'm afraid, but a piece of tracing paper, just lay it across the top, and then you should find that your machine will move quite smoothly over the tracing paper, and you'll still be able to see where you're going. If you're in doubt whether or not your presser foot is going to go across it, take the needle out and have a practice. If it goes smoothly across, it'll be fine with the needle. So this is the Dinko flower one that I did. It's going to, I'm not seeing that very well on my screen. I hope you can see it, it's fine. That was Procyon dye that I've used on that one. So to show you here, I stitched on a sewing machine the main vein, but then I wanted to come round to do some quite curly outlining there. I just did that by hand. If you're going to do it with a hand needle, use a thimble. It'll make your fingers very sore. On the inside here, you can see for decorating on the inside, I haven't put this together yet, it's still in a state of undress. I did some cut-out shapes and I put them on the inside using this bottom part of the jingo leaf from the transfer there. So I think that worked quite well. I've done a bit of beading down the centre one, so if you can see it again, there's beading all the way around the outside and the centre leaf, which made that one stand out quite nicely, I thought. So you can bead and embellish as well, ladies.
We have a question.
Yeah.
Carol's asked in the chat, when you stitch on the machine, is it with or without thread, please?
Without thread, I am going to briefly show you. I've got the machine sitting on the floor. I will briefly show you.
Thank you.
And it's without thread. Yeah, take all the thread out. It's just to make the stitch holes. You could, I suppose, do it with thread if you wanted to, but I just so love doing a line of running stitch, hand stitching. It really relaxes me, and it's meditative, and I love doing it. So that's why I do it that way. But you could try it by putting thread in if you wanted to. Not sure how it will work. I haven't tried it myself. Yeah. Oh yeah. So just show you, I think on my introduction, I've got the Dragonfly book, which I've got here. Okay. Just to show you, that was done very much with a dry brush, just brushing a dry brush over the background to get the orange colour, cutting the template into very sort of squiggly leaf type shapes. I wanted it to look as if it was reeds or something at the edge of the water. And then I beaded down the centre and then made a dragonfly. And these are just stick-on gems, ladies. If you like using those, they work very well. The back is not stitched so heavily. The reason that I'm also showing you this one is because I just got carried away doing this as a whole picture in one go. So by the time I came to make the book up, it was a bit oversized. So I've got a very small flap there, and then my papers didn't fit. So I just did them off center and stuck a dragonfly on the leaf there. So watch out for, making sure you're doing the right size and the stitching in the right place. And you can see there, in the early days, I wasn't so much aware of how to do the spine so competently. So you're seeing the back of the stitching on the spine, which is what I was saying earlier. Avoid doing that from the outside, do it from the inside. Okay, right. So what I'm going to do now is, for today, my design for today, I thought I'd do a seed head. So that's what I'm going to work with you. If I can find the example, that's the bookmark I made using a very simple shape to give me a seed head, okay? And I'll show you how to do that. I just kind of scribbled out what I wanted this to look like on that spare sheet of paper there. So if I can go back just slightly, because it's at the front, I think, sorry, to find the little shape that I used. Here it is. Okay, so I simply cut a sort of half circle shape. Hope you can all see that, out of a bit of card to make the main design there. So I'm just going to move my book away. I think I've told you all the bits and pieces of notes I had there on that section. I'm just going to move this out of the way and come back there, that way. So I'm going to show you how to work with the freezer paper. Remember, ladies, draw on the matte side and not on the shiny side. So begin by putting down your piece of freezer paper. Just tape it onto your cutting mat or whatever surface you're using with a little bit of masking tape. Then take your template, okay, and just lay it under the freezer paper, all right? And you should be able to see through it. It's not showing very well on screen, but when you come to look at it, you will be able to see the lines through. So draw a line at the outside in pencil, just use a pencil, at the outside of the spine fold, both sides, okay? And then find the line that I have drawn on there, which I call fold back book edge margin, okay? And then mark about an inch, 3/4 of an inch to an inch on both sides. Do it both sides of the paper from that center spine and join it up so that what you've got, hopefully, I'm actually just going to use a ruler with this bit here between those two marks and your fold back is where you would do your main design if you're doing a separate design. So now put your shape on your paper, draw around it, as you see there, this is a piece of scrap paper. Then put the freezer paper over the top and draw your shapes onto the freezer paper, ready for cutting out, okay? Now I'm back to Blue Peter fashion because this is the one I prepared earlier, okay? And then you will just cut out all of your shapes. And ladies, I just have to go to the other side of the room to plug in the iron, which I obviously haven't kept hot all this time. So do bear with me. I'm going to try and get through this. I'm working upside down. As I said to Dora this morning, I had a little practice at this yesterday, and I'm glad I did because it made me realise that you would be seeing everything upside down if I didn't work upside down. And I just thought it was easier to turn it all around so you could see. And I'm just taking out that shape. The more intricate your shape is, the more difficult your cutting out of the stencil will be, and the more difficult your stitching will be. But that's entirely up to you. As I say, take time, make a design that is something that you want to have. So I'm just going to move away the cutting board for a moment, put it on the floor. Floor's always a good place to put stuff, isn't it? And I'm just going to switch the iron on and bring it across. My little iron ready. Okay, and I have got a peachy colour. I dyed a peachy colour. I don't know if you can see how peachy that is. That was using burnt orange Procyon dye. Stay there. Right, so shiny side down. My flex is all curled up. Sorry, there we go. That's better. So I've got a nice little portable ironing base there. Just, you don't need to tape this down because what you're going to do, once you make sure you're in the right position on your cover, your coloured cover. Just hold it in place and just iron down the freezer paper. Just over where you've got your shapes cut out, so that the freezer paper adheres to the cover. Try and make sure all your little corners are all stuck down. I'll go around and turn the iron off in a few minutes. Then I'm going to work with this one is textile paint, but whatever paint you're using, I'm sure it will be fine. And I like to put it on with a sponge rather than a brush. And I don't want it too heavy, but I am going to, before I do that, just put a bit of baking sheet down to protect my surface underneath. Shake the paint. On this one, it sticks a bit to the lid, so I just dip into the lid, okay, a little sort of plastic yogurt pot lid or something to dab it down so it's not too thick on your sponge, and I'm just going to dab through as much as I want in there, just to colour through, okay, onto the shapes. More there. You can use several colours if you wish. Just going to go with the back of the sponge to dry that off a bit so it's not too textured and too wet and too heavy. Okay. Now what you have to do there is carefully, because sometimes a bit of freezer paper will stick to the background, and there I have my background. Can you see that, ready to stitch through? So my shapes should be around the two parts of the template that will form the cover of the book. Okay, I'm going to leave that to dry. That will be ready for stitching after I've shown you how to briefly use the woodblock prints, which I'm going to do now. So I can leave my ironing cover there if I wish, but I did get ready a wad of newspaper, a little bit of foam, which will give you just a soft background for your woodblock printing. I'm going to use a different colour here, just to show you how I work with the wooden block, which I've now lost because I've put it somewhere. Here it is. I used it this morning to have a little trial run. I'm going to use this one because I think it's quite a nice shape for doing straight stitching, lots of straight lines on it, and I think it will work quite well. So again, whatever paint you're using, for the woodblock printing, it does need to be a fairly sort of thick, opaque style paint. I don't think it will work very well at all with watercolours or other sorts of paints. It does need to be fairly sort of thick, okay? A little bit of a dab on a sponge and just very carefully dab it all over the woodblock. Not too much, but if you remember Beth Colino, she said keep dabbing drier rather than wetter onto this small piece of paper I'm going to be using here, which would be about the size of the book if I was making it into a book. Right way round, so dab it down, give it a good press down, make sure you get a nice print. Not a very good one, I'm afraid, sorry. That one, it's a little bit faded at the top, but I don't mind that. I quite like the abstract looks of things. And I think it's nice to see that something is made and not manufactured. And you can always you know, get a paintbrush and add little features if you wish to later. So here's the better one I made this morning. Can you see that? It's a better print. Have a go on some scrap paper first. I guess I've got a little bit I've rushed through that and not done it properly. And I've started stitching. Can you see? I started stitching the spines through. And I'll use that for a greetings card or something. I won't be finishing that today in terms of it being a book. Okay? So what happens, you get all organised and then you start piling up lots of stuff in the corner. Okay. So this is still drying, ladies, but what I've got is another Blue Peter Fashion example in the sewing machine, just to show you what happens when you come to make sure I get the right way round, which is there. Okay, just got a small sample in there. I'm not going to bore you too much by doing lots of machining in front of you, but it's just, as I say, ordinary presser foot, no thread, feed dogs up, just come through underneath. I'm just going to do my backtrack, forget that little bit from it. Backtrack, draw on your lines. Now put your just to show you that you can stitch through the paper quite easily. No, I just can't reach the pedal. Just going to get the pedal up. So it's ordinary tension, but there's no thread, but you do have to put the presser foot down. Just a straight stitch. I'm on size 3 here, and I'm just going to go through, run it down. And I'm not sure how easily you're going to see this, but I've got some other samples to show you as well to see how it works if we need to. Can you see I have stitched those holes? Yeah?
Yes, it's cleared, Alice.
When you stitch through paper, the needle pushes through the paper to the other side. So you can see the back looks quite different. That's the way I usually stitch. So that you're stitching at the front. For this, you would need to be able to see your design anyway, so you'd always be stitching from the front. If you're stitching on blank paper, just be aware that the back does look quite different because it pushes the paper through. And that's what I'm saying about it's permanent once you've made that hole. It's not like fabric that you can probably, you know, not see the hole so much when you put the stitch hole through. So for this, I could go back in the machine and I could do the other, sorry, it's on here. So I could do the other markings that I did. Actually, I did all of these on the machine, apart from the outline around the bottom. Okay, so you just reposition your machine. Okay. Right, ladies, so what I was saying earlier is if you're going to varnish, make your stitch holes first, but don't stitch. So on my sample that I started working on with you this morning, I have now made stitch holes. Can you, if I focus that, maybe, can you see I've made a few stitch holes there?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so having done that, it's very, very simple to varnish. I'm going to use Mod Podge, but as I say, you can use acrylic wax. You can leave your paper unvarnished if you prefer. You can use diluted PVA glue, about half and half, but it does take a bit longer to dry than the Mod Podge or the acrylic varnish, acrylic wax. So get a nice sponge, clean sponge, because if you've got paint on your sponge, obviously it will come through with the varnish. Do make sure that your images are as dry as they can be. You can use the hairdryer or the iron to speed it up a bit, but do make sure it's dry. One thing with this, there is a danger that some of the paint will spill out over the edges as well, which is why I use a sponge and not a brush. If you use a brush and you paint across, you definitely will smudge your image unless it's really fixed hard paint. Acrylic paint's pretty good. This is textile paint. So just get some varnish Mod Podge on your sponge and just keep dabbing it over, all over. Dab, dab, dab till it's covered. I think this is a better way of doing it than with a brush anyway, because you get a nice finish. You get a little bit of texture on it, but your paper is textured anyway because of the nature of the paper. It's quite substantial, quite textured. You will notice that it curls a bit as you do it, but I'm going to go right to the end, even though it's boring just to watch me dabbing varnish on, because I want to make sure that on here I get both sides done. So as I said earlier to Pat, with paper, when you put varnish on, do both sides. If you only do one side, it's going to curl too much. And once the varnish is on, it's a bit difficult to iron it flat because the varnish will start to melt again and it'll just be ruined. Right, so dab it on all over. I'm doing it very quickly, but you can take lots of care when you do it to make sure it's covered. Just one very small coating, turn it over, make sure you've got baking parchment underneath it because otherwise it will stick to whatever your surface is. Get some more Mod Podge if you need it. I didn't put quite enough on for both sides before. And then just do the back. As I was saying to Carol when she was asking about size of needle, if you're using a very fine thread and a fine needle, you might find that the varnish clogs the holes more than you would like. But it's not the biggest problem because you can just punch them through again with your hand needle when you come to hand stitch. It will clog anyway, whatever size needle you use, but it's actually much easier on the hands if you've made those stitch holes first with a sewing machine where you can. And as I say, you can hand form those stitches, but use a thimble because it does make your wrists ache. And if you're like me, I've got very arthritic wrists now, and I find it's a bit of a problem, but all you youngsters won't have that problem. Okay, right. So then once it's done both sides, you do need to leave it to dry. It's not a great idea to speed that up with heat with the varnish because it might kind of melt and go into sort of mucky. You can do more than one coat if you wish. If you want it thicker, wait for a coat to dry, put another coat on. But I find for these little books that one coat is enough. I'm just going to wash my sponge and I'm going to come back and show you something else. Bear with me. So I show you, it was about 10 minutes since I did this varnish. It actually is completely dry to the touch. It will need to dry properly over time and it will do, but it's actually to work on again, it's absolutely fine. You can see I'm not getting any drag whatsoever. So just to talk to you a little bit about the stitching, which is the next step for you if you're going to stitch. And I think it does enhance the book quite nice to have some stitching on it. You can use a colour of thread that matches or contrasts. You can use thickness of thread depending on what you prefer to use. I'm mostly using, as I say, these lovely paint box threads, or I've got 21st century silk threads here, which I really love to use. I'm running very short now, so I hope we're going to get some shows going soon so we can have a nice double round and see different things on sale. And obviously Linda's got some very nice threads as well. Perle thread works quite nice. I've got a sample here that I was showing Linda earlier. If I can get it to focus and try and show you, yeah. So you'll see a difference because you can hardly see the first line of holes I've made there. Not getting a very good focus, I'm afraid. Sorry, ladies. That's better, isn't it? So you can see the first line there, which is stitching from the front, which is what you'll do because you'll be stitching through your design. have to go backwards and forwards. I can't work out working backwards here. Okay, so that's the first line, it's smooth. This is the second line here, which you can see I punched through from the reverse, which gives you a little bit of the paper punches through. Just trying to hold it very still so you can see that. I think it's better now. You can actually see a difference between the two, and you can see the punching from the reverse. Running stitch here. As I said before, you have to have an even number of holes if you're going to pre-punch them on the machine. So never start right at the edge, in case when you get to the bottom, your thread is coming through to the front here. Okay, you need to have space to make another hole to get through to the back. I'm doing here a solid line, which I was showing Linda, the way if you work it, so that on the reverse it shows a running stitch. If you're going to leave your stitching on show, I think that looks quite nice. And you just do that by going backwards and forwards. Okay, rather than doing a full back stitch each time, which gives you a different finish that way. You can just secure your thread, first of all, with a bit of masking tape on the edge, and then thread it back through there, because you haven't got anything like you've got on fabric to secure your thread nicely behind. So that's ready for me to stitch now. I'm not going to get very much of that done today, I'm afraid, but I will do that one later, and I'll come back and put a picture on the website of the finished one eventually. Right, so what you had in your pack was 10 sheets of paper, if you remember. Oh, excuse me, got a bit of a tickle. Some of those sheets, which I had here earlier, yes, here was one. Here was one. I've got one, two. 8 of the sheets were for the signature pages, so that was the larger size sheet, and then there were some smaller ones. The reason for having them this size, the smaller one, is that's because when you get to the end of the roll of wallpaper, that's what you've got left. But that is the perfect size for your bookmark. So that worked out really well with the wallpaper paper. So 8 sheets, because you might want to cover up your stitching. You might want to leave it showing. I like both. I do some and some. So with all of your sheets, I'll show you that when we come to do the assembly of the book, whatever you, thank you, darling, whatever we do. But first of all, the two smaller sheets that you've got, you can use for 2 things. One can be the bookmark, which for the bookmark, simply fold it in half along the short edge. And I've got a bone folder, which I like to use to crease all of these edges. You can use the back of the spoon, that works just as well. Just give yourself a nice sharp crease whenever you fold this paper. If your paper curls too much, just iron it. As you know, I love ironing, but I don't mind ironing paper. Fold it in half, okay? And on one half, you can put a design. I've done several of these, and I like to do just some curly stitching down the front, down one side. So just do that on one half. You can then make a nice hole at the bottom for a tag or a tassel. Do that on both sides, making the hole, but just stitch one side, because then you simply fold it together and glue the 2 sides together so that you get a nice bookmark to use on your book. I'm going to get a finished one here to show you. So this is a blue one's got a tassel on the end now. The back has been folded over, glued down, so you've got a nice plain back. You can, if you're going to be cutting out shapes from the other piece, you can stick one of those on the back. You can cut out shapes from the other piece, if you've got a shape cutter or freehand with scissors, whatever you want to do. So on this one, I've put shapes on the page, and I used the negative shape for the inside cover. So you can see that that's the negative where I cut this one out from, and then I used it there on the inside of the cover. When you're stitching, what I also like to do is to stitch an edge on the fold. Let's see if I can focus that as well. I'm not very practiced at this, I'm afraid, ladies, sorry. So yeah, can you see I've stitched a nice straight line on the fold before I've assembled the book. I think that looks quite nice. If you've done an all over pattern that's coming over the fold, you'll have a pattern on the inside as well, or you can stitch separately on the inside if you like to do that. I think the ammonite one goes over the page a bit, so I can show you on that. Yeah, so you can see how at the bottom there, the ammonite came over the page from the front, which also I think is quite a nice effect. On this one, I left the stitching raw. I quite like that. Or you can, as I've done on this one, put a paper over on the inside, which one of your signature papers would be fine to do. So you're back to seeing me sitting at my little work table here again now, yeah? Okay. So now for one I made earlier, Blue Peter fashion. Try and put it in some sort of order for you here. Okay. So what I'm going to show, if everyone wants to pay attention to it, is folding the cover. You've had a little bit of a practice, some of you already, and also had a practice with the template. Now this is one I made just using blue. Oh, going to the wrong screen. I just laid the cover paper in the tray, put some water in, and then put some diluted Procyon dye, and I left it to dry until it was dry. It was a shallow bit of water, but you can see it came out rather nicely. I weighted it down with some stones, and the stones as well picked up the dye. I quite like that as well, so that was quite a good thing there. And some of the dye powder just kind of collected in places, and I really like that. So I've just used stitch here to enhance the book. This is going to be the front cover, so you need to decide which side is your front if you haven't already. In that centre line, instead of stitching, can you see I've put sequins and beads? I think that was, get that in focus, some little silver sequins and blue beads. You need to size your stitch holes for that. I've got sequin secured with the bead, then a bead in between. That was the size of my stitch holes. I think that looks quite nice, okay? So, have your cover face up in front of you. And the first thing you do is go edge to fold front sides together. Press it down. I'm going to use my bone folder, but as I say, the back of a spoon will work quite nicely too. Make sure you really crease that spine down, okay? It's exactly the same format as doing it on the paper. You can use your template, have it next to you, if I can find my template, to look to see where you fold. Now, I'm going to just go to where I'm saying here on the spine fold, here and here, to fold back. You can be a little bit flexible on these folds if you prefer to, but I find that that sort of size guide there works quite well for this book. And then I'm going to be careful as you press, it will press down. And if you haven't got any stitching over your fold, it will press down very nicely. Okay. What should happen now, when you go to the other side to fold back, that way, okay, I'm going to fold back this side. It should match to the edge if we've got the sizes right. So can you see I'm going to the edge? Get that. And then I'm going to fold back to the spine. Exactly as you did with your template, you're just now doing it on the cover. Like there. Right. I've only folded the spine. That's all I've done at this stage. Okay? Hold it together. Now, what you need to do next is fold your signature pages. You've got enough to have 2 sets of 4. Okay, so I've folded some already. So they fold edge to edge along the short edge of the signature page. Now what you need to remember, ladies, is I cut all these by hand, so it's not machine precision cutting. I don't mind if they don't fit exactly on the line. Pretty much they do, but you might find, if that bothers you, you can trim them, okay? But you know, if you used pre-cut cartridge paper, for example, they would all be perfect, but I'm not striving for perfection, I don't think. I think Charlie Mackesy has a message about perfection in his book too. Right. I'm not striving for perfection. I quite like the fact that something is made by hand, not by machine. So now what I'm doing is I've folded all of the pages. I'm putting 4 together and 4 together, okay, down the centre. I'm going to get 2 large paper clips. If you remember, Frances Pickering, those of you who are at her workshop, she said, don't use bulldog clips. I don't. I use 2 large paper clips. On this one, I'm going to put, I'll show you again, make sure I can see it on screen myself. So spine towards you.
Yeah.
For one side, for the other side, the crease of the paper towards the spine. Open them up to the centre of each side, okay, and then hold them with the paper clips down the spine. Now my safety guide to you said if you're using a very sharp pointed tool, mind your fingers, be very careful. On your template, you'll see I put binding guides down the side, okay? All that is a centre mark and 2 evenly spaced mark either side. You need 3 holes through the centre.
Yeah.
I had my awl. I'm using this small awl or any sharp pointed tool. You could use a thick needle with a thimble. That should go through it too. But do be very careful when you're making the holes. So place your guide. Don't make any pencil marks. You can if you want to, but you could just place your guide. I'll do it towards me if I can. Okay, so you're going to pick out the centre hole with your awl. Just hold the book at a little angle. If you can see what I'm doing, just hold it at an angle. So what you're going to do is punch right through to come out the other side. Mind your fingers, yeah?
Yeah, got it.
Okay. Same thing with the other 2 evenly spaced guides either side. Just make a little mark there so I know where I'm going with the awl. I can take the template away. Doesn't have to be exact, but just kind of fairly evenly. And again, you can see, I'm trying to make sure I get it to the right angle with the camera for you. Going to punch through again, minding my fingers for it to come out the other side. Okay. And again, so what you end up with is 3 holes fairly evenly spaced along the centre. In your pack, you should have found a piece of very strong thread. This is what you call teddy bear thread, which I remember Janice Gunner, when we did the shibori dyeing with Janice Gunner, she said use what's called teddy bear thread for doing the shibori stitching. And I got a whole reel, so that's a bit of what you've got, which was Janice Gunner's advice. Just going to get a thimble now. Always use a thimble because it's going to be quite hard sometimes to push it through. So you go through the centre hole, out the other side. Have I got the right camera angle there? I think I have, haven't I? Through the centre, out the other side. Leave about 4 inches on that one side. Come back. Let's go this way, because that seems to be logical to me. Go back to one of the side holes and come through. Okay. Oh, do you know why I couldn't do it? Because I've actually just put the needle through the rubber part of the thimble instead of the correct part. Don't do that, ladies, because it might be dangerous. And then come through, okay? Come back through the centre on the side you started.
Yeah.
And through the hole to the side of that. Trying to watch the camera, because you tend to look at the thing you're working on and not the camera to make sure you've got the right angle.
Yeah.
You can get a focus, losing focus there. I think when you move under this camera, I think Diane told me it would keep losing focus. So sorry, Diane, I wasn't paying enough attention. Back through to the side you started, okay? Now, you just loop under what you could call the first stitch, okay? And you can take the needle away, put it there so I don't lose it. Pull it tight and make 2 knots. And your book should then be secure. You can find other thread to do this with if you want a different colour. Linen thread will work quite well. Any really strong thread will work really well. Make a couple of knots and you can snip off the edge. I have got more books here that are ready to be assembled if I need to show you that again later, anyone who wants it repeated. Then you just take off, being careful, slide off your paper clips. Okay, so now you've got your pages secured inside either side of the spine, which if you've decorated your spine would look quite nice. If you haven't decorated your spine, you could always add something later and stick it on inside if you wanted to, but that's quite nice on its own, isn't it? Right, so from here, we're going to fold the flaps in. So we'll do that. You can use the paper as a guide, or you could just measure it a little bit wider. So I'm going to just go about 1/4 of an inch, which gives me that edge for folding back, like there. Where's my... I've got stitching coming across here, but you can see that works quite nicely on there. What I would say is avoid the centre with stitching, because that's where you're going to put your cord in. Okay, hold that back there. And the same the other side. You can use the first fold to help you get that. This is quite stiff paper, so you will find it takes a little bit of encouragement to actually get a fold in there. And once you've varnished as well, it's even a little bit stiffer. So that's all we're going to do there is then make a fold that way. Okay. So I've now got my nice little neat book all folded, and you can see I haven't come to the edge with it. I've got my pages tucked in nice and neatly inside. Bring back your guide. Your binding guides. Tuck that to inside of the fold. I'm going to come around that way. Okay, inside of the fold. And then you'll just make a hole. Again, the same as we did in the spine. It will go through much quicker because it's only just one thickness to go through. Wiggle your sharp pointed tool around a bit, or your needle, whatever you're using. And then you can thread your cord through. Might take a bit of persuasion. These cords are fairly fine. I made them fairly fine, but if you've got thicker cords that you've made yourself, you might need to keep tweaking your hole till it will go through. Pull it through, okay? Knot the end. And then pull it through until the knot gets there. And then do that both sides. If you want to cover your stitching, I'm going to cover my stitching because there's quite a lot of loose ends there. I would cover it with the first page of the first signature, fold that back, and that will all be glued in. So you want glue here and here. I use bookbinding glue, partly because my older sister, she was a bookbinder. So I do it in memory of her as well. I like to use bookbinding glue. It makes me think of her, not that I don't think of her all the time. Then a bit of glue down there and secure that down. Now, somewhere here, yeah. What I suggest you do when you glue is get a small triangle of baking parchment. Once it's glued, put that between there. So as you're waiting for the glue to dry, it's not going to stick to the pages. When you've glued both sides, put them together, put them under a heavy book for a little while the glue dries, and that should be quite secure when your glue dries and you're finished. So that's the book assembly. You can then tie your strings around. You can put a nice little bead on the end of the cords if you have one, some sort of embellishment there. Another thing I'm just going to show you quickly, because I quite like the idea of doing it, is some of you might remember from last year's paper workshop, I have this gilding wax or metallic wax you can get. It's called Treasure Gold. And what you can do is I've done on here, if I can show you, is just rub a bit around the edges if you like that sort of effect, just to give it a nice finish off. I think it's nice on something that's looking a bit aged. So you just can rub a bit of gilding wax on your edges if you like that effect. I'm not sure how well you can see that on screen. That's that. Yeah. Okay. Right, so this is my one that I've written some of the Charlie Mackesy little sayings in. So yeah, this gilding wax that I bought in Hobbycraft is quite soft. If you get Treasure Gold, you'll find it's more a solid block. So be very careful with this. We're going to get a bit of baking parchment here, just so that when I dab my finger in this, because it's quite liquid, dab it in, but just rub it on there so you haven't got too much on your finger. And I'm just going to, hopefully you'll be able to see this, Dora, run it down the spine.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Okay. If you use too much, it'll go over the edges, but I think that's quite nice. So just use another finger to rub off any excess that you don't want.
Thank you.
I can see it really shining here, but I'm not sure it's coming through.
I can see it at times.
Yeah. But I use this for lots of things. What you can do as well, if you've got something, say for example, do you remember we did the brown paper, the textured brown paper last year? And all those little bits of texture that you can rub across it and it picks it up just on the texture parts. That's a very good effect as well. I really like this, and it's got a really nice, it's got a really nice shine. You can see it on my finger, really shining there.
Lovely.
It's got a bit of an oily smell to it. It's kind of like oil paint in a way, and it is oil based. But yeah, it's lovely stuff. I love it.
It does take quite a long time to dry, I found.
Yeah, it does. It does take a bit of time to dry, but you can also buff it up. Get a soft cloth and really buff it. That will dry it and shine it more as well. Yeah. Do you use that, Wendy, then? You use that
In the past,
building work?
yes, I have done in the past.
You can put it on the other side now so it matches. I think it's quite a nice effect. Oh, glad I had that. Yeah. I really do like it. Don't overuse it though, because if you do, it's just too much shine and you'll then want to knock it back. I'm going to go in the centre as well. I've got carried away here now. I do that kind of thing sometimes. I'm going to go on the centre spine as well.